The following production has not been rated by the Corrupt Motion Picture Association. This film contains overwhelming revelations about the vulnerabilities in the New Hampshire election system, the evidence on how electronic voting machines were maliciously used in the 2020 general election, and the federal crime of destroying electronic election data from the machines before the forensic audit in the town of Windham. Exposure to these truths may trigger cognitive dissonance to some viewers, but is suitable for all audiences. Viewer discretion and discernment is advised.
The 2020 elections are the safest and most secure in our nation's history.
This presidential election was the most secure in U.S. history.
The most secure in American history.
The 2020 election was the most secure in American history.
The 2020 presidential election has expressively become the most controversial and polarizing elections in U.S. history. While most attention to irregularities have been primarily focused on U.S. swing states in question, algorithms were also identified in the machines here in Windham, New Hampshire. This immediately initiated the need for a forensic election audit. Harry Hursty and Philip Stark, Windham, New Hampshire's hired forensic auditors for the 2020 presidential election, both played a crucial role in manipulating the general public on Windham's election audit findings. Against federal law which requires all voting materials, information, and data to be preserved for 22 months, Hursty knowingly destroyed election evidence by personally overseeing and directing the unbacked reset to pre-election status of all New Hampshire's voting machine memory cards. In 2016, out of Wisconsin court, under penalty of perjury, Harry Hursty testified that manipulation of the memory card can either be persistent or one-time, meaning that if the card is reset but not reprogrammed, the card will be clean and the hack will not work until the card is reprogrammed again.
As far as if these machines were to go to an audit, is there a way to save the state of the current condition of the memory cards so as to preserve that data just in case? Because we're obviously going to run the ballots through the machines again.
If you were trying to use the same set of media, so the machines and the memory cards themselves, no. The only way to reuse that system is to actually wipe it and then start accumulating ballots from scratch.
Is there a way to copy that data off?
There is a way to copy the data, yes.
Before you run that
and
test?
I believe that's the state's intention, is to actually copy those memory cards so that they can keep the current cards in the state that they're in.
All right, that's good information. Thank you.
LCD will then duplicate this memory card? No. LCD display says reset card to pre-election? Yes.
You just saw actual video evidence of New Hampshire's voting machine memory cards being unlawfully reset to pre-election status. This was 6 months after the 2020 election, making it a federal crime. Aside from the legal obligation, the election committee video explained while we do have the capability to duplicate the cards to preserve all election data, it was never done. Here are the actual machine tape printouts showing the recorded action and the timestamps of the card being reset, done prior to conducting the actual audit. If a hack was present, this would have removed it. On June 1, 2021, Stark and Hursty were interviewed by Nick Masseter. During this interview, Stark articulates that there are multiple ways to create a hack on the voting machines used here in New Hampshire. One being, if the memory cards were reset, the hack would erase itself. He continued saying this type of hack could be identified if the audit machine results were closer to the hand counts than the original machine counts.
First of all, there is a way to detect whether they have been hacked or altered, which in one case, so there are hacks where they would erase themselves, as Hari explained. If that had happened and we had gone back and run the ballots through again, that malware would be gone and we would have gotten a total that would have been closer to the hand total.
Let's start that over. Pay close attention to what Stark is saying.
There are hacks where they would erase themselves, as Hari explained. If that had happened and we had gone back and run the ballots through again, that malware would be gone and we would have gotten a total that would have been closer to the hand total. That's not what happened. We got totals that were closer to the original scan total.
Let's summarize what Stark said. There is a way to determine if the machines had a hack. If the hack was erased, the hand count will be closer to the reset machine's ballot count from an audit, versus from election day when the hack was present. He is saying this is not what happened during the Wyndham audit, which we can prove is a bold lie. The following charts show a comparison of totals between each of the 4 individual audit machines. Let's take a look at the first chart for machine number 1. The audit machine totals for each machine are represented in the center column. These are the only number totals that change from chart to chart. The left column on the chart show the original scan totals from the November 3, 2020 election. The far right column on the chart show the May 2021 hand count totals. Each column shares with another the total difference between the two, which are displayed in the circles below. Highlighted here are the original scan totals from the 2020 election, and totals from audit machine number 1. The difference between their totals is significant at 2,242. Now compare that number to the difference between the May 2021 hand count with machine number 1, totaling only 409. The smaller the number, the higher the accuracy. Now, looking at the chart, let's re-review what Stark was saying.
There are hacks where they would erase themselves, as Hari explained. If that had happened and we had gone back and run the ballots through again, that malware would be gone and we would have gotten a total that would have been closer to the hand total. That's not what happened. We got totals that were closer to the original scan total.
This is wrong. The charts all show the exact opposite to the narrative Stark has been deceiving the public with. When you look at the numbers for each individual audit machine, you can clearly see the difference between the hand counts to the totals of each machine were significantly lower 100% of the time.
Nothing today is showing evidence of fraud.
So Joe Biden is the president-elect. There's no indication of widespread voter fraud here in New Hampshire. I can't speak.
Nothing today is showing evidence of digital manipulation. Right now, this seems to be a case of a perfect storm where so many things happened in order to have this discrepancy.
New Hampshire, I can't speak to other states. I just don't know. Every state does it different, but I can tell you in New Hampshire, there's no evidence of widespread voter fraud. Folks voted at an unbelievable rate.
Unbelievable rate is an understatement. Multiple New Hampshire towns and an unprecedented voting turnout rate of 100% or higher. Here is a map showing all towns and cities of New Hampshire. Using the 2020 election census data, prepared by members of the NHVIG, we are able to identify specific areas of concern. The yellow areas indicate between 80 and 89% voter turnout, a red flag for suspicion. The red areas, however, indicate areas of even greater concern with 90 to 99% voter turnout, and in many extreme cases, well over a 100% turnout rate. Of all 243 cities and towns in New Hampshire, 172 of them raised concerns through voter registration percentages, with a total of 61 of them having 100% or higher for voter registration in the 2020 election. High-level indicators of statewide voting anomalies continue to be uncovered, such as the 9% turnout of same-day registrants, which in New Hampshire's 2020 computes to roughly 80,000 voters. New Hampshire's Supreme Court allows non-resident voters, who simply claim intent to become a New Hampshire resident, to cast a ballot on election day. There is no correction to these votes, even if the individual never becomes a New Hampshire resident. Election loopholes in our system, such as these, create easy opportunities for election manipulation and fraud. Here is a chart created from the research of the renowned Seth Keshel, a predominant name on the national level of exposing the 2020 election. It shows both Rockingham and Hillsborough County vote history. You can see the amount of Republican and Democrat votes per year. Looking at the Hillsborough County chart, starting at the bottom working up, you can see the Republican Party grew fairly steadily. The Democratic Party between Clinton and Biden shows a miraculous 24% party growth. Above in Rockingham County, Similarly, you see the Republican Party gaining momentum while the Democrat Party was falling flat. Then again, another miraculous growth of 25% in the Democrat Party between the 2016 and 2020 elections. But it doesn't end there. Look at the updated census information on population growth, which doesn't support such a massive growth influx within the Democrat Party. They are high-level indicators or anomalies worth digging into. This graph, generated by NHVIG, is of Windham, New Hampshire's voter machine activity for this election. If you look at how all machines performed, this graph makes it easy to identify only machine number 2, that shows inconsistent readings in contrast to the rest, and that discrepancy was visible all the way down the ballot as shown. That was just an example. Now let's take a look at Merrimack's readings, a New Hampshire town whose charts embody the essence of machine discrepancy. You can visually see the anomalies on 3 of 6 machines, numbers 3, 6 and 9. Now compare these numbers to the overall voter registration at the top. You can clearly see the same here for U.S. Senator and Rep. And again in State Senator and State Rep election readings, you are seeing the same profile straight down the ballot. Another notable observation was they went with an almost 3.4% growth in vote, they grew almost 10% and their population growth was barely flat. Machine irregularities. We hear it was dust from the ballots, it was folds causing misreads, whatever the excuse, or excuses. The best option was for patriots, such as the members of the NHVIG, to hit the streets with arduous and unpleasant door-to-door canvassing, starting with the 2 towns of concern, Waterville Valley and Rye, New Hampshire. Both were identified in a voting census for having well over 100% voter registration and voter turnout in the 2020. What was discovered in just these 2 areas alone? Commercial addresses were used, non-existent people voted, even dead people voted. They identified people who did not vote, but a ballot was cast in their name, amongst other discrepancies reported. Officials in the state of New Hampshire deemed none of this to be reliable feedback. All findings were met with state pushback at every turn, including rejection of sworn affidavits that were signed by the actual canvassers, but not signed by so-called voters, even if they were non-existent. Here's one example on how the New Hampshire audit process has been tailored by corrupt politicians. Legislative action for New Hampshire Bill SB 43 was passed in April of 2021. This bill gave authorization for an audit of Rockingham County District 7, for the state rep race portion only. New Hampshire's Election Law Committee Chair, as well as the Chair on the Special Committee on Redistricting, blatantly removes critical portions of disqualifying criteria in the bill, in regards to the designees assigned to conduct the audit. The first portion removed prevents designees from being connected with LHS associates, or others directly related to the sales or service of the ballot counting devices. The second would prevent designees from being elected officials involved in the general election of November 3, 2020 held in Windham, New Hampshire. Lastly, removing the prevention of being elected officials involved in the recount of the Rockingham County, District 7, House of Representatives race on November 12, 2020. Where is the elected New Hampshire leadership? Why are there no investigations taking place? We, the people who no longer trust our election process, are being silenced and censored by machine-selected puppets financially entwined with the Washington, D.C. pay-to-play swamp. The system is obviously broken, and doesn't seem to want to be fixed by those in power. There are over 200 voting machines used in New Hampshire. The same machines are used in 137 towns throughout the state. During the Windham audit, only 4 machines were checked, and down ballot candidates only. The same 10,006 ballots were scanned through each of the 4 audit machines, never attaining the same count. These results are just the single town of Windham, New Hampshire. What about the other hundreds of the same machines used in the election throughout the state? It is imperative, regardless of party affiliation, that all citizens contact the New Hampshire State Legislature and Attorney General's office, and adamantly demand a statewide full forensic audit on the 2020 election. In March of 2020, HBO premiered the documentary, Kill Chain, the Cyber War on America's Elections. This film outlines how Harry Hursty, the same auditor that deleted New Hampshire's 2020 election memory cards in just 6 months after the election, is a computer hacker turned so-called election expert, which investigates election-related hacks. In detail, he reveals just how unprotected and vulnerable electronic voting systems really are. Let's watch a small 2.5-minute clip, which seems to be foreshadowing, using an example which parallels to the machine irregularity with Windham's machines in the 2020 election.
In Georgia, we ended up seeing the strangest thing. In a heavily Democratic precinct, there was one machine out of a 7-machine precinct that showed heavy Republican wins, while the precinct itself and all of the other machines were showing heavy Democratic wins. And it made us go, wait a minute, something's weird about this. How could this happen?
But just on the one machine out of 7, the other 6 showed a Democratic majority in every statewide contest.
Right, and in Georgia and in a lot of other states, when the machines are printing tapes at 7 o'clock at night when the polls close, it is a law that for purposes of transparency, that those tapes, one from every machine, be posted at the door. And so like here's a photograph.
It was just an end-of-the-day dump of what was in the memory onto paper. So it's just the final tally according to its internal software, according to that machine.
Right. And this particular tape is the one that got all of the Republican votes. It got substantially more votes for Brian Kemp, the Republican, than Stacey Abrams, the Democrat. And this was true all the way down the ballot. The Republican wins every single race on this one machine. Something had to happen to cause one machine to have such different results than its neighbors. I called Philip and said, is this important? Is it as odd as it looks to me? So he went to work on it with his magic statistics.
And the magic grad student, yes.
So what we did was simulate this process, run it over and over again, saying if we had this many Democratic voters and this many Republican voters in our precinct, and we assigned them at random to machines, how likely is it that we'd get a Republican majority as great as what we saw on machine 3? So we did this probably 10,000 times, and it was an astronomically small chance.
Less than 1 in a million.
Next is an 8-minute clip from the 2006 film called Hacking Democracy, The Hack. Here, Harry Hursti shocked the nation when he successfully hacked the entire Diebold voting system in Leon County, Florida. He did it using just one memory card, and he changed all the votes, which went virtually undetectable. The memory cards are America's electronic ballot boxes. They contain the votes. Diebold election systems went on the record, making the claim that there is no executable program in their memory cards. Harry Hursti proved that was false. Florida's courageous election supervisor, Ian Sancho, volunteered to prove that Diebold was lying about their machine's security. A mini-election was held with our hacker excluded from the county's computer room. Not only did Hursti successfully change all the votes, he even made the machine print out a false zero tape, the paper safeguard that is supposed to show that there are no votes preloaded inside the voting machine. Following the hack, California's Secretary of State ordered an investigation by the top computer scientists at UC Berkeley. Their report confirms that Mr. Hursti's attack on the AVOS is definitely real.
We have constructed a mini-election, but Harry Hursti, as you have served as a technical advisor of how to do this, we're going to ask you to remain outside. After you, let me introduce you to my election staff. To ensure that we've not prepared some sort of a device that has been pre-rigged, pick the number, and then we'll grab that unit, and that will be the device that we will count the ballots on.
I just feel like this is the one.
Okay, and the winner is unit 15191.
5191.
What we have here is a programmed optical scan ballot. There is only one question on this ballot. Can the votes on the Diebold system be hacked using the memory card?
I have only touched the memory card, not the other parts of the Diebold election system, which is going to be used today. Only the memory card.
I can certainly speak for myself and Harry, and that we're going to vote yes.
All right, then let's have the rest of us vote no. 2 individuals Hugh and Harry will be voting yes. The rest of us will be voting no. And then we'll scrutinize the ballots afterwards to ensure that that is indeed the mark.
I will say that I'm wrong and Diebold is right, and I'm going to say no, they cannot be hacked.
It's impossible. So I vote no.
I'm going to film myself voting. Excuse me.
I'm going to mark this ballot no. Dr. Thompson?
I am going to mark this ballot yes. I've seen some pretty concerning things.
Well, it's down to you. You're the last voter, Harry.
All right. I think it could be. So I vote for yes.
You will be the second yes.
All right. Ian, here is the memory card I have touched.
Okay. Now, this is the only piece of Diebold equipment that you've used.
That's correct.
Well, thank you. Let me take your ballot in. This card will go into this slot. The next activity that the election worker does on the morning of the election is turn the machine on, making it live to receive votes. When you do that, this machine will produce what is called a zero total tape. The machine is going through a self-test analysis, and then it'll spontaneously turn on. This is Harry's card that is telling us that there are 0 votes stored in the memory. Okay, let me get the ballots. Let's insert a yes ballot. We're going to put in another no. 7. And the last no ballot, 8. Placing the ender card in this device and telling it to turn off its counting function and do its reporting function will now cause the voting machine to print out a tape reading the number of votes that it had just read. Oh my.
Oh no!
What is it? What is it?
7 yes, 1 no.
Oh my gosh! Oh my gosh! Let me see.
Here's the tape.
7 people said it could be hacked.
And we put through 6 and 2.
6
no's
no's
and 2
2
yeses.
Oh my gosh! Do you know what this means?
How do we know that Harry didn't just change the report and the votes themselves on the memory card are still correct? If that was the case, when they go into GEMS, the results would be different, isn't that right?
I mean, the only way to know that is to read them into GEMS and to check the vote totals.
See what GEMS says. Should we do that?
I think we should, because I want to confirm for my own analysis, is this just a superficial
Right, that's a good
hack?
question.
In other words, did we just change the words on this paper? And we will upload this memory card if I had not seen what was behind this, I'd have no reason not to. I would have certified this election as a true and accurate result of a vote.
Susan, what does this mean to you?
Makes me cry. I'm sorry, but it does. There's so many reasons. The reasons because there are people out there
who are giving their lives to try to make our elections secure, and they're being called conspiracy theorists and technophobes, and these vendors are lying and saying that everything's all right, and it's not all right. And I'm crying because I'll quote somebody that I know who said that it's as though our country is one country pretending to be another country. How can this be happening to our elections? This really does affect me.
I don't know exactly how to describe what I saw here. I think we, as election officials, need to be a little bit more demanding from the vendors as to the technical specifications of this equipment. The vendors are driving the process of voting technology in the United States.
The way these attacks work is that before every election, every voting machine needs to be programmed with the design of the ballot, the names of the races and candidates. And voting officials do that by inserting a memory card into the machine. If an attacker can infect that memory card with malicious code, well, when the memory card is inserted into the machine, it can change the programming running on the voting machine and cause the voting machine to, at the end of the election, output whatever results the attacker wants. That ballot programming is created on basically a desktop PC, a workstation somewhere operated by the county or by an outside vendor. If an attacker can infect that election programming workstation called an election management system, and in many cases these are connected to the internet, well, then that attack can spread to all of the memory cards that are used to program voting machines in that jurisdiction. How easy would it be to hack into one of these? Well, I'll give you an example. In Michigan, during the 2016 election, 75% of counties outsourced their pre-election programming to just 3 small companies. This is the website for one of them. It's a small business that's operated essentially in a strip mall, and they have photographs on their website of all of their facilities, even all of their employees. If I wanted to try to hack into these guys, well, maybe I'd go to their Who We Are page, find Larry the President's assistant, Sue, and spoof an email to her that appears to be coming from Larry telling her to urgently open this attachment. Of course, the attachment contains a virus I wrote, and once she opens it, I'm in their systems. So, in fact, it's not nearly as hard as it might seem to target voting machines over a wide scale and to potentially hack into them even from the internet. So just to review, you look at the polls before the election and figure out which states were likely to be close, probe all of them, find the ones with the weakest protection, then hack into the election management systems there or at the outside vendors the states use. Once you hack into the election management system, you can spread malicious code to individual voting machines and have your code say swap 10% of the votes in the places you infected. Then even if the votes are also recorded on a piece of paper, you don't have to worry, because in most of those states, they're going to just toss the paper out without looking at it.
Modems in voting machines are a bad idea. Those modems are network connections, and that leaves them vulnerable to hacking by anybody who can connect to that network.
ES&S insists while there are 14,000 of its modems in use, there are firewalls separating those modems from the public internet.
Once a hacker starts talking to the voting machine through the modem, they can hack the software in the voting machine and make it cheat in future elections.
What is the vehicle for the transmission from the ICP? Is it cellular modem versus VPN?
Well, it is a cellular modem that can be configured in a VPN, right? And we currently in Chicago and Cook County, we work with Verizon to secure that network.
More modern voting machines, they actually have a mobile phone modem in the speak. They have a mobile phone connectivity to county headquarters. They are sending the results.
Some jurisdictions are relying on uploading election results using cellular modems or the internet. That, of course, introduces another point of vulnerability, not just to the data that's flowing, but also to the software, the devices that are being connected.
Many of these voting machines have modems embedded into them, and the modems are used at the end of the election to transmit the vote totals on election night to the county elections office. So these modems contact, they're cellular modems, and they contact the cellular network, they contact a cell tower. So the cell tower traffic these days in our modern times actually goes through internet. It goes through the same kinds of routers and switches that the regular internet traffic goes to. But also in between that cell tower and that voting machine, an intruder can intercept data going to the cell tower and intercept that communication, that phone call. If you can trick a voting machine into contacting your device, your fake cellular tower, instead of a legitimate tower, you can actually use that connection to get back into the voting machine and get back into the tabulator and then alter votes and software.
Voting machines are not connected to the internet. This is something that you hear all the time in the US from election officials. Unfortunately, it's not actually true. In many new voting machines come with 4G wireless modems so that they can be connected to the internet from the polling place in order to upload the results faster. Now, to me, that sounds crazy. Why would you want to put your voting machines on the internet right in the middle of the election, potentially at the most vulnerable time?
These clips are disturbingly familiar after revealing New Hampshire's election and voting machine discrepancies. It cannot be emphasized enough that these concerns should be a bipartisan issue, as it massively affects the very foundation of our democracy. The mainstream media, big tech, and corrupt politicians on both sides of party lines, while suppressing and censoring voter fraud revelations at all costs, currently profess their absolute denial and push narrative propaganda that there is absolutely no evidence of voter fraud in the 2020 election. They attest there is no proof of fraud while simultaneously colluding to silence every conservative voice who speaks of it, or tries to expose it. It is said to be only far-right conspiracy theorists calling foul on the 2020 election. However, we can simply look back to the 2016 election, and the countless well-documented testimonies of predominant Democrat Party affiliates, and computer forensic experts, singing a very different tune about voting machines. Let's take a walk down memory lane.
Virginia just stopped using touchscreen computer voting because it's so vulnerable. Right. We need to look at all the voting machines. Every Secretary of State needs to be, assisted in making sure that they are not being hacked and attacked.
I continue to think that our voting machines are too vulnerable.
Researchers have repeatedly demonstrated that ballot recording machines and other voting systems are susceptible to tampering.
Even hackers with limited prior knowledge, tools, and resources are able to breach voting machines in a matter of minutes.
In 2018, electronic voting machines in Georgia and Texas deleted votes for certain candidates or switched votes from one candidate to another.
The biggest seller of voting machines is doing something that violates Cybersecurity 101, directing that you install remote access software, which would make a machine like that, a magnet for fraudsters and hackers.
These voting machines can be hacked quite easily.
You could easily hack into them. It makes it seem like all these states are doing different things, but in fact, 3 companies are controlling this.
It is the individual voting machines that pose some of the greatest risk.
There are a lot of states that are dealing with antiquated machines, right, which are vulnerable to being hacked.
Workers were able to easily hack into an electronic voting machine. It was possible to switch votes.
43% of American voters use voting machines that researchers have found have serious security flaws, including backdoors.
We know how vulnerable now our systems were. I know the hackathon that took place last year, where virtually every machine was broken into fairly quickly.
I actually held a demonstration for my colleagues here at the Capitol, where we brought in folks who, before our eyes, hacked election machines, those that are being used in many states.
Aging systems also frequently rely on unsupported software, like Windows XP in 2000, which may not receive regular security patches and are thus more vulnerable to the latest methods of cyber attack.
In a close presidential election, they just need to hack one swing state, or maybe 1 or 2, or maybe just a few counties in one swing state.
I'm very concerned that you could have a hack that finally went through. You have 21 states that were hacked into. They didn't find out about it for a year.
Right now, we have over a dozen states that either don't have any backup paper ballots or only have them partially. Do you think that our adversaries don't know what those states are? Of course they know what those states are. And if we have a close election, in the general election, in a presidential race, and one state's outstanding, and their ballot boxes gets hacked into, their elections get hacked into, we will have absolutely no backup. Stalin was unconcerned about the vote. After all, he explained, he said that who voted was completely unimportant. What was extraordinarily important, in his words, was who would count the votes and how. It is time to put politics aside and come together to secure the future of our election. So whether you're a four-star general, a fourth grade teacher, or a computer engineer at Foursquare, this is an issue that unites us.
In at least 40 states, elections are carried out using machines that are at least a decade old, and like any technology, they're susceptible to increasing failure with age. Some state officials have had to turn to eBay to find critical components like dot matrix printers, decades-old storage devices, and analog modems. Aging systems also frequently rely on unsupported software like Windows XP in 2000, which may not receive regular security patches and are thus more vulnerable to the latest methods of cyber attack.
In 2016, state election websites in Illinois and Arizona were hacked by intruders who installed malware and downloaded sensitive voter information.
It is worth fighting for integrity in our election system, which means that they are free from interference by a hostile or an unfriendly nation. Let's put the resources into upgrading the state's elections systems. Because what we know is this, there are a lot of states that are dealing with antiquated machines, right, which are vulnerable to being hacked. I sit on the Senate Intelligence Committee and Senate Homeland Security Committee. And we receive all kinds of information about the vulnerabilities to our national security. We are vulnerable in terms of foreign interference with our elections.
It's my understanding that some of the election system vendors have required states to sign agreements that prevent or inhibit independent security testing. There's a saying that I'm sure many of you have heard, which is the difference between being hacked and not being hacked is knowing you've been hacked.
And they are still looking for ways to steal information about voter registration, for example. There are some tax experts in Silicon Valley with whom I have met who say that maybe what they'll do this next time is to really disrupt the actual election. Shut down the servers that you send results to. Interfere with the operation of voting machines because still too many of them are linked to the internet. So we are still very vulnerable.
I mean, I can tell you in Virginia when I was governor, I had to replace all the machines because I remember when I first voted, when I went to Richmond, moved down as governor, I remember I kept voting in the Senate race, kept voting for the Democrat, Republican name kept coming up. 3 times that happened.
What do you mean kept coming up?
So, we had the touch screens. I was voting for Mark Warner, our senator. And Ed Gillespie's name would light up. Happened to me 3 times. Finally, the 4th time, Mark's name, and I quickly hit vote, and I got out of there. All the cameras are looking at me like, this guy doesn't know how to vote. I mean, what's going on? So then I had an investigation done, and listen to this. I brought in some technology experts. They were able to hack into our machines from off-site in about 5 or 6 minutes, and within 4 minutes, they were able to change a vote. I decertified all the machines. Now in Virginia, we have paper ballots.
43% of American voters use voting machines that researchers have found have serious security flaws, including backdoors. These companies are accountable to no one. They won't answer basic questions about their cybersecurity practices, and the biggest companies won't answer any questions at all. 5 states have no paper trail, and that means there is no way to prove the numbers the voting machines put out are legitimate. So much for Cybersecurity 101.
The vast majority of 10,000 election jurisdictions nationwide use election management systems that run on old software that is soon going to be out of date and ripe for exploitation by hackers, according to an exhaustive analysis by the Associated Press. Pennsylvania, Wisconsin,
Michigan, Florida, Iowa, Indiana, Arizona, and North Carolina, among others, are all at risk. Even the state of Georgia, which just passed legislation to buy new voting machines, is on track to buy equipment that suffers from this significant cybersecurity weakness. Let's say the election is decided by a small percentage, and people in America don't think that the election was fair. The effect that would have on our 200-year experiment in self-governance, our democratic system would take a real hit. Our elections weren't secure last week, and they sure as heck aren't secure this week. And anybody who says otherwise is either selling you voting machines or simply has a malicious intent towards our elections. At one point in the Intelligence Committee, both sides seemed to agree that no votes were changed in the 2016 election. And I said, the experts I talked to say that until you have a forensic analysis of a vote, until you go in there and scrub the whole system, you can't really say that.
So they're giving these voting machines, specifically the hack into, how successful were they?
Well, the ongoing record was they hacked within 90 minutes of being in the same space as the voting machines. Now, these are not hackers that are actually touching the machines. They're doing this from across the room on internet-like connections. But what it demonstrated, Pedro, is that the machines that we count on to make the basic connection between the American voter and the election results are vulnerable if they're in any way connected to the internet.
And so when you say hacked, what were they able to do once they gained access to the machines?
Oh, all sorts of things. They could manipulate the outcome of the vote. They could manipulate the tally. They could delete the tally. And they could compromise the vote in any number of ways. It was limited only by the hackers' creativity.
Just how vulnerable the machines were. I mean, what we found is that these machines were purchased by local voting authorities, state and local voting authorities, maybe 10 years ago. In many cases, the software and the hardware have not been updated, so they're as vulnerable as an old laptop that we might have in your home that you no longer use because it's just so out of date. Then what we found is that the supply chain for these machines is largely unplotted. I mean, we found parts from China, we found digital electronic parts from all over the world. By way of hacking, there's the potential that the actual vote tally could be compromised. So votes could be changed from this to that, or votes could be suppressed, votes could be deleted, votes could be added, so you could actually change the tally itself.
We can all agree that they are 100% correct in explaining, in accurate detail, the vulnerabilities with using electronic voting machines that have the potential to sway our elections by means of pre-selecting winners, and not fairly electing them. Nothing has changed with the technological susceptibilities with using machines to count votes, only the values behind the politics of those seeking elected positions to run our local, state, and federal governments. Knowing what we know from the overwhelming evidence of voting manipulation, here are a few powerful comments from the illegitimate resident currently occupying the White House.
Secondly, we're in a situation where we have put together, and you guys did it for our the President Obama's administration before this. We have put together, I think, the most extensive and inclusive voter fraud organization in the history of American politics. It's no longer just about who gets to vote or making it easier for eligible voters to vote. It's about who gets to count the vote.
It is ironic Biden mentions that it only matters who gets to count the vote. But is it more appropriate to say, it is what gets to count the vote? Such as programmable machines? Here's some food for thought. New Hampshire voting machines are provided by LHS. LHS is a contractor for Dominion Voting Systems, or DVS. DVS and related companies are owned and heavily controlled and influenced by foreign entities and interests. Dominion Voting Systems is based out of Toronto, Canada, and assigns its intellectual property, including patents on its firmware and software, to Hong Kong and Shanghai Bank Corporation. we know that China has been working to position themselves as the largest global superpower. So as America regained its place in the world prior to our current belligerent occupation in D.C., we became a grave threat to that initiative. That is why the timing of the so-called pandemic was peculiarly convenient, which ultimately led to the unlawful and unconstitutional reconfigurations of our election processes nationwide. These unlawful reconfigurations, in conjunction with programmable voting machines, created the opportunity for our enemies to overthrow both our government and our duly elected U.S. president. Elections have consequences. November 3, 2020, was the true insurrection. A record-breaking 55% and over of all New Hampshire voters believe the 2020 election was not secure, and have seen enough concerning evidence to support a full statewide forensic audit, a demand that is being met with unprecedented bipartisan obstruction against the will of the people. Sadly, it is becoming evident that our election enigmas being exposed but unremedied are intentional and by design. Here is a recap of New Hampshire's irrefutable evidence, which directly contradicts the narrative of our corrupt elected officials, the mainstream media, as well as big tech, all in collusion with each other to conceal the greatest crime of the century against the American people. 1. Windham, New Hampshire voter machines were off by over 1,300, exposing an algorithmic hack. The hack programmed the electronic voter machines to short each House Republican by nearly 300 votes. Democrats gained 100. The hand recount revealed there was vote flipping from the machines. Consider the overall state election results, if this was happening statewide. 2. 9%, which equates to 80,000 voters, were same-day registrants in New Hampshire's 2020. New Hampshire's Supreme Court ruled, out-of-state residents with intent to obtain New Hampshire residency can same-day register and cast a vote, a status change never to be verified, and an unchangeable vote tabulation regardless. 3. A staggering 30% of all votes cast in the 2020 were absentee ballots, first time in New Hampshire's history. 4. Also, for the first time in New Hampshire history, the down ballot results were red, but the federal election result was blue. 5. Attempts to have a New Hampshire forensic audit of the 2020 election were killed in the Election Law Committee led by Barbara Griffin, and unanimously kicked to an outside study which would go beyond the evidence preservation window. 6. SB 43 passed, authorizing the Windham audit, but down ballot candidates only. Barbara Griffin changes language in the bill, allowing conflict of interest designees. 7. LHS CEO verifies at Windham, New Hampshire Selectmen meeting, capabilities and intent to copy machine memory cards. This gave validation that the later destroying of evidence was both avoidable and intentional. 8. Controversial forensic auditors Harry Hursty and Philip Stark were chosen by the state to conduct the Windham audit, against the will of the people. Why? 9. Electronic election data deleted well under the federally required 22-month preservation window, in just 6 months after the election. 10. 200 voting machines are used in New Hampshire. The same machines are used in 137 towns. Only 4 machines in the state were checked, and down ballot candidates only. The same 10,006 ballots were run through each of the 4 machines, never obtaining the same counts. 11. A totals comparison between the November 2020 original scans, each audit machine after the memory card reset, and hand count, revealed a hack was present prior to resetting the memory cards. 12. NHVIG conducts a 2020 general election census which reveals 61 towns of New Hampshire had an unprecedented 100% or higher voter registration, one as high as 192%. With the national average of voter turnout being at approximately 70%, New Hampshire had 71 towns with 80 to 89%, 40 towns with 90 to 99%, and 22 towns with 100% or greater. The census also exposed a multitude of New Hampshire towns having specific machines with 1 in a million type anomalies in tabulation. In addition, many towns showing significant growth in ballot count between the 2016 and 2020 elections, which did not reflect in population growth. 13. An unexplainable 25% party growth after declining numbers identified in the Democrat Party, also unreflective in New Hampshire's population growth. 14. NHVIG performs ground and desk canvassing. 904 homes were visited in 2 towns, 444 people answered. Desk and door-to-door canvassing revealed over 800 cases where bogus votes were cast from prior homeowners illegally. 13% had votes cast that were not from legit voters. Some more discoveries included uncovering phantom voters, commercial addresses were used, registered voter not residing at the address, dead people voted, non-voters had ballots cast in their name, more votes from residents than occupants, ballots cast from old addresses and ballots cast from out of state. Over 100 affidavits were collected from just 2 towns of canvassing, and are being notarized and delivered to the New Hampshire Attorney General and Secretary of State's office. 15. Citizens are religiously facing unwavering obstruction from both political parties. State officials even reject sworn affidavits signed by canvassers, but not signed by said voters in question, even if said voters were non-existent. Patriot citizens are working diligently every day on uncovering more and more evidence. This film only scratches the surface, but is meant to counter the false narratives and propaganda of having no fraud in the New Hampshire 2020 election. It is the hope of we the people, that when this information comes out, state officials will be forced to act on the leads and evidence presented, and initiate investigations, and criminal charges when appropriate. We the people demand accountability, and will not stop fighting until the treasonous acts against our state and our nation are brought to light, and the criminals are brought to justice. So, where do we go from here? This is a call to action to all New Hampshire citizens. We need all hands on deck, everyone needs to get involved. Identify patriot groups throughout the state, and network with those local to you, as there is strength in numbers. Every individual brings valuable knowledge, resources and talents to the table that are crucial to New Hampshire's success. Find where yours can be applied that are most useful. Demand election transparency, as well as a full statewide forensic audit of the 2020 election. Take some time to conduct localized desk canvassing through NHVIG's electronic database of the 2020 voter rolls, found at nhvoterintegrity.org, and report findings of concern to action at nhvoterintegrity.org. Every Saturday from 10 to 11:30 a.m., unless posted otherwise, the We the People New Hampshire group orchestrate a rally of flag-waving patriots who convene at Capitol Plaza on Main Street in Concord, New Hampshire. Participants protest various statewide concerns, from unconstitutional mandates, medical freedom, and election fraud, all issues that seem to be connected for a particular deep state agenda. It's the perfect place to meet active freedom-fighting patriots from all over the state. In addition, also every Saturday, the New Hampshire Patriot Hub Group orchestrates a flag-waving, chalked windows, red, white and blue honking vehicle convoy, which travels together up to Concord to join the We the People rally for 10 a.m. There is 100% silence on all these gatherings from the corrupt local news media. The deep state does not want the majority of people anywhere to know we are uniting, yet these patriot groups are growing significantly every day. Some words of advice before we close out. Be relentless on your local representatives through emails, phone calls, and appearing at local and state meetings and hearings on critical matters. Make them know this issue is not going away, and both their action, or inaction, will impact their political future. Be active in the election process, locally and statewide. Meticulously vet all incoming political candidates to ensure they are constitutional-minded and America-first advocates. Vote out those whose actions and principles do not align with We the People. Demand your town remove the LHS machines and move to ballot hand counting in all elections. Hold your selectmen accountable. It is their responsibility to ensure the integrity of the voting machines and that they have been managed to the trial commitments. They can be sued personally if this has not been done, and their bond can be sued. Class action lawsuits are effective. File a civil lawsuit to remove the voting machines and to ask for the ballots. Do not allow yourself to be intimidated. The deep state embedded within the state of New Hampshire has been unleashing their arsenal to halt our efforts and kill our spirits. New Hampshire Rhino Governor Chris Sununu has shamefully weaponized the bootlicking state police against the Patriot movement, which have already conducted unlawful arrests, as well as unending acts of intimidation against We the People. It is imperative we continue pushing forward, and demand accountability of both he, and his forever disgraced Gestapo. Lastly, don't give up hope. All these politicians wouldn't be so callously and desperately trying to obstruct our efforts, if there was nothing to hide. We must remember, they have everything to lose, so will continue their fight until the very end. The truth will always be revealed. Good always wins over evil. This is no longer about the right or the left. We must unite all true American patriots from across both party lines. United we stand, divided we fall.